Saddam Hussein was born in 1937. He had a very rough childhood. His parents didn't love him.
I think that influenced him in becoming the person that he was during his dictatorship.
At the age of 20, he took part of a political party. In 1956, he had a rebellion against the king back then. But 2 years later, a group of officers killed the king. Thanks to this event, monarchy was abolished.
In 1959, there was an attempt against the Prime Minister of Iraq, led by Saddam. This attempt didn't work out, so Saddam ran to Egypt. Months later, Saddam returned to Iraq. Here he tried to murder Qasim. This worked out perfectly, but the only problem was that he was caught and went to jail.
Maybe if the government had listened to Saddam, this could prevent the attempt against the Prime Minister.
Arif, the president at the time when Saddam was in jail, died. His brother replaced him, and thanks to this event, Saddam ran out of prison.
Corruption has been exist since very remote times. In my opinion, it's one of the most important factors that cause a problem. And why I'm saying this? Because in this problem, the corruption is seen when Saddam was free because the presidency was changed, so they let him free. And maybe if he's still in jail at that time, there will be no problem.
In 1968, Saddam seized power. By 1979, Saddam purged any opponent against the political party known as Ba'ath Party.
Well, in 1968, when Saddam seized power, here we can see a good example of a totalitarian government. Why? Because when Saddam seized the power, he was part of the Ba'ath Party. His ideals were so extremist that he purged all the people that were against his own ideals. So, in my opinion, I think that if Saddam was like a federal power or something like that, he will be open to new ideals, not only be focused on the ideals he had before he seized the power.
As an exiled former Iraqi diplomat said of Saddam, he was a dictator who is ready to sacrifice his country, just so as long as he can remain on his throne in Baghdad.
This tells us that Saddam was kind of nationalist because he, in those times, was ready to do anything to bring his country to the top.
First act was to purge the Ba'ath Party of potential rivals, particularly Abdul Hussein, the Secretary General of the RCC who had questioned Saddam's rise to power. In total, 66 party officials were accused of plotting against the government. 22 were executed and 33 were imprisoned.
And everything has a why. And let's say, talking about his behavior, the main reason of it is because he grew in a very, let's say, difficult environment. He never went to school. He lived with his uncle, and he never had like that education, that values that he needed to be a leader.
Saddam had a poor education, so when he moved with his uncle to Baghdad, he was influenced by the political atmosphere that wrapped the city. At the same time, the young people in universities felt a huge rejection against British colonialism and American political intervention.
In Baghdad, he tried to join the military school, but he was rejected due to his poor academic curriculum. Due to this, he joined the political party known as Party of the Arabian Socialist Renaissance. Saddam was attracted to the nationalist and revolutionary ideals of this party.
The period of time Saddam took control over Iraq is mainly characterized for being full of costly and unsuccessful wars against neighbor countries. The main goals of Saddam was to make Iraq the leader of the Arab world and to take over the Persian Gulf. And as he was trying to accomplish this, he suppressed any internal discomfort toward his position.
All of this led Saddam to launch an invasion against Iran's oil fields. which resulted in a war that caused the interruption of Iraq's oil exportations that affected the economic development, which slowed down his ambitions. This Iran-Iraq War lasted until 1988, where both countries agreed to cease fire.
Despite the debts Iraq had with foreign countries, this didn't stop Saddam as he kept on building his armed forces.
In August of 1990, the Iraqis overran Kuwait in hope of using their vast oil revenues to boost their economy. Kuwait quickly triggered a worldwide embargo against Iraq. As Saddam ignored the request to withdraw the armed forces, a large buildup of US-led military forces in Saudi Arabia, and the UN resolutions that authorized the use of force to stop this conflict.
The Persian Gulf War began in January of 1991 and ended 6 weeks later when the military coalition drove Iraq's armies out of Kuwait. Iraq's defeat triggered various internal rebellions, but Saddam stopped these from causing more riot. Thousands of refugees fled to the northern border of the country.
As part of the ceasefire agreement with the United Nations, Iraq was banned from producing or having any chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. Along with this sanction, many others were put into place, causing a severe disruption of the economy. Saddam's refusal to cooperate with the UN arms inspectors led to a 4-day air bombing with the United States and Great Britain. Both countries agreed to support any efforts of the Iraqi to unseat Saddam.
The Iraqi leader even came to ban any United Nations inspectors from entering his country. It became clear that Saddam was teaching one of his sons to succeed him. On March 17 of 2003, George Bush ordered Saddam to resign from his position during the next 48 hours, or he would face war. When Saddam refused to leave his position, the U.S. and any allied forces launched an attack against Iraq on March the 20th.
My fellow citizens, events in Iraq have now reached the final days of decision. For more than a decade, the United States and other nations have pursued patient and honorable efforts to disarm the Iraqi regime without war. That regime pledged to reveal and destroy all its weapons of mass destruction.
During Saddam Hussein's presidency, there were many military aspects. They were an everyday thing for Iraqis.
One of the most notorious military events was the war against the U.S. After Iraq invaded Kuwait, this led to the war known as the Gulf War. The main politics he implemented during his government was wanting to take control all over the Arab world, which led to many wars during his presidency. This provoked discontent and fear in the population. The constant wars made the families in Iraq have a low income.
The main politics he implemented during his government was wanting to control all over the Arab world, which led to many wars during his presidency. This provoked the discontent and fear in the population. The constant wars made the families in Iraq have a low income.
The biggest sport in Iraq is soccer. During Saddam Hussein's dictatorship, this sport was very famous. Many people watch it, so with this, they would forget a little bit of all of the torture that was going outside.
Well, I really think that Saddam paid a lot of attention with sports because this was like a distraction for all the people that was like, okay, there are a lot of wars outside, we have a lot of problems, the country is like it's very poor and so on, so they use like soccer to have their mind in other stuff, so people can't blame him because they're like more focused on the sports game.
For entertainment, the public events often consisted of outpourings of praise for Mr. Hussein. You can notice that in Saddam Hussein's statue that was located at the entrance of the village. Also several portraits of him during his presidency.
Another way of entertaining was observing the inauguration of new buildings, parks, and so on. During these inaugurations, you can hear a verse about Saddam that goes like this.
We'll stimulate ourselves by saying your name, Saddam Hussein. When we say Saddam Hussein, we stimulate ourselves.
Saddam Hussein's regime has succeeded in bankrupting the country even though it boasts 112 billion barrels of oil in reserves.
Iraq was in bankruptcy during this period because of the nationalization of oil. Also, the war between Iraq versus Iran influenced a lot. Another aspect was that Saddam supported a lot of terrorist organizations, so a lot of the country's capital went directly to the terrorists.
During the dictatorship, Iraq was a country filled with fear. If there was any suspicion that you were plotting against the government, you were most likely to be killed. Hussein wanted his country to be the greatest and the wealthiest among the Arab countries under pressure. When the US got into the conflict, Hussein showed his principles of nationalism by saying no to the US threat and going to war.
He was not just going to leave the power just because another country threatened him by sending troops. The consequences of his act resulted in many inner conflicts, the loss of millions of people, confrontations with the US and many other countries.